Hi, welcome to Gospel with Greg. And in the video today, I'm going to be addressing the question of how do you give advice and support someone you can't relate to. So basically, they're going through something that you've never had to deal with, and you're kind of just not sure, how you would give advice or be supportive, or to bear their burdens, as the Bible says in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. And this can be something that um, can come up in a couple different types of settings. Maybe you're speaking with someone who's also a believer, maybe a friend or somebody you go to church with, or, maybe somebody you just met, but they're also a Christian, and you are too. And you want to support them. You want to be able to give them good advice, but you just don't know what to say because you haven't had to deal with what they're going through. Or, maybe it comes up in a witnessing setting. Maybe there's someone that's not saved that you're talking to, that you've been witnessing to, but maybe they have this certain hang up that they're just not sure how they would get past. And you kind of have this feeling of like, oh, well, I've never really dealt with that either. So, how do you deal with that? And, it's great that, we want to be a support for these people in these situations, but it can be frustrating, and a little nerve wracking, even maybe, um, that, we feel like we don't know what to say, because we want to have an answer for them. We want to be helpful. And, we hate to see them continue to struggle like that. And so this video is going to give some advice for that, because I've found myself in that situation many, many times. And God has kind of helped me learn some things about what do you do in that type of situation. And so, first, I'll read that verse I referenced about bearing the burdens. So, Galatians 6:2, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And so, again, this tells us the importance of bearing one another's burdens. Like I said, it can take different forms. Um, but if you're in a situation where you're dealing with somebody who's gone through something that maybe you haven't, and you're not quite sure how to respond, uh, one important thing to think about is, if trying to give advice is what's going through your head, make sure you should even try to give advice, because, you know, maybe it's not the time or place for it. And, maybe God is going to send somebody else down the line who has been through their situation before, to kind of have that discussion with them. And maybe the purpose of why he had you cross their path was to show them love and kindness, even if you couldn't necessarily relate to what they're going through. And so, it's good to make sure about that, because, you know, sometimes if you try to give advice when you shouldn't, it kind of can come off condescending, and can be not very well received from the person. I can tell you, I've had people before that have tried to give me advice I didn't ask for. They maybe found out that I was in a particular circumstance, and they took it upon themselves to try to give me a bunch of advice on what they thought I should do. And I didn't receive it very well. Some situations, it made me just want to get away from them. And so it's important to think about that. If somebody has a burden that we're talking to, it's great to be able to want to give them, um, to have that desire to want to help them, but we kind of need to be mindful of what's actually needed here. There are some people that, they just need somebody to listen to them, and that's part of what we should do too. And and maybe even when it comes to giving advice, maybe you can't give advice on the specific thing they're dealing with, but maybe you kind of can on a larger scale. I've had many situations where I would be preaching and I would interact with people that were recovering drug addicts or alcoholics, and I've never been in that situation myself. So, I didn't necessarily try to say, well, here's how, you kick your alcoholism or your addiction or anything like that. I didn't give direct advice on that, and it probably wouldn't have went over very well if I had tried. But, I was able to still talk about, how God can help us in very adverse situations in general, and would kind of give some examples of how he had helped me with, my medical situations I've been through, since some of those have been very severe, and how he's helped me get through very dark chapters in my life with mental health issues. And so sometimes, um, you can do that. And, particularly in a witnessing setting, maybe somebody is dealing with something like that and you've never had to go through it. Maybe you still can talk about the strength that we can have in God without necessarily trying to give advice on their specific circumstance that you don't know anything about. And, and I've seen that work very well before, and I think that there can be this temptation to, to try to be relatable with people. And again, that's another desire that not necessarily anything wrong with it, and it can be good. But when you force parallels that aren't there, um, again, it can kind of rock the situation in kind of a negative way. And I think that when it comes to being relatable with people, you don't necessarily have to be able to relate to somebody in their exact specific situation of, okay, well, they're dealing with addiction. So what's the closest thing to a drug addiction I've ever had? Oh, I know. I'll bring this up. No, you don't have to do that. But something you can do is remember that no matter how different their walk might look from yours, all of us have made mistakes. None of us are perfect, and we all need God's grace. So you can kind of bond with them on that level and kind of approach the situation with that mindset. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily their specific thing that they're dealing with. And um, and I mentioned listening to them. Some people, that's all they want. They just want somebody who's going to listen to them. And you know, and not like stick their finger in their face. And, maybe everybody else they have shared their struggle with has not wanted to listen to them, or, as soon as they said the first little thing about what they're dealing with, the person doesn't even let them finish talking and they just stick their finger right in their face. So maybe you just being willing to listen to them, that might mean more to them than you even know. And that might mean even more to them than, whatever advice you try to give them. And so that's important to think about. And, you may find yourself in a situation where they do outright say, what do you think I should do? And it's important to be honest. If you have no clue about their situation, or you're kind of not sure how to respond, it can feel a little embarrassing to have to admit that. But it's important to remember it's better to just be honest and just not try to give advice than to give bad advice. You don't want to just make up something that's not going to be helpful to them. You want to be honest, and not risk sending them on the wrong track, and that can come off sincere too. To be willing to admit that. And maybe it's the case that you tell them you'll get back to them if that's a possibility. You try to find out more, or something else that's a potential, depending on your circumstance, is to point them to someone who can help better. And I would caution you with this, to think about your situation, because what you don't want to do is do something like, maybe they say they're struggling financially, and maybe you don't have a ton of money yourself and you don't have the best advice for them. You don't want to just point to somebody you barely know that you go to church with and say, oh, well, Ed over there would love to pay your electric bill. Maybe you should just go ask him. Because that's going to kind of, maybe cause some tension. You don't want to do that. But, if there's someone else that that you have a good relationship, that you really feel like that person could and would love to help them, that's a possibility. And I've done that before where there was somebody that had a certain struggle, and I felt like I really wasn't equipped to be able to give them the help they needed. But there was someone else that I was friends with that I knew that this guy would love to help someone in this situation and had the resources to do it. So I reached out to him, and he was able to help this person with what they needed. So again, depending on your circumstance, that might be an option too. And the last big thing I want to emphasize with this, if you're in this situation, is realize sometimes only God has the answer. And, again, we have a tendency to where, we want to have the answer for them. We want to figure things out. But ultimately, we don't know everything. And, this is an opportunity for us to have faith and to trust in God, to have this mentality of, while maybe I don't have all the knowledge or experience or resources to give this person, the help that they're looking for, God does. And so, ultimately, if nothing else, you can talk to that person and you can say to them, be honest and say, I really, I'm not an expert on it. I don't have all the answers, but God does. God has more than enough power to help you with this. And, I am willing and happy to listen to you talk about this, and, to pray with you, and, try to help you find out answers, even if I don't know them off the top of my head right now. I can definitely support you in that way. And ultimately, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And, we'll never be let down when we put our trust in Christ and depend upon Him. The answer that we're looking for might not always, the answer might not always be how we imagine it. But when we seek God first, ultimately we'll get the answer we need. And so I hope this video was helpful. And until next time, God bless.